have a great rule in neurosurgery that I learned early on, and that is never worry about a patient alone. And really, that's a great allegory for life. Like, never worry about anything alone. Like, share it with somebody. You're going to hear a different perspective. They may tell you a different side of the story that you haven't thought of, and you're going to worry less.
Today I'm talking to Mark McLaughlin. Mark's a neurosurgeon and at the same time also a youth wrestling coach. Can you imagine that? How do you explain what you do to the youth and at the same time inspire them to be their best selves, give them self-confidence? And how do you learn from that again and bring that back into a neurological surgical team in a hospital where you've got to lead brain surgery, in essence? I mean, we'll even use that as a reference. It's not as bad as brain surgery. Now, Mark does that on a daily basis. So what can we learn from Mark and from the way that he leads and the way that he coaches and the way that he talks to West Point about what leadership is? He wrote a book about cognitive dominance. Now, it sounds really dominating, and as he calls it, almost like Darth Vader. But in this case, it is about how we act in a crisis. I think no more relevant than it is today. So I hope, just like me, you look forward to this talk today with Mark McLaughlin. So where are you at the moment?
I am in Detroit, Michigan at the NCAA National Wrestling Championships, which is it's a pilgrimage I make every year with my friends. I've wrestled at William & Mary in college, and we had a program there many years ago. Unfortunately, there have been some changes in wrestling, one of which was Title IX, which was a mandate by the president to make men's and women's sports equal. And as a result, unfortunately, my college program was dropped. But the team that we had, we've remained together, and every year we still go to the national championships, despite not having a team to cheer for. And it's become quite a reunion now, 30, 40 years after college, seeing old friends, reconnecting, and it's just a wonderful experience to see all your blood brothers together. It's been great.
So what does women's wrestling have to do with that?
Well, so it's an interesting and complex story, but really, when Title IX came about, the initial reaction was there was a lot of funding for men's sports at the time. I think it was passed by Gerald Ford in the 1970s. And really what it said was that men in colleges needed to fund men's and women's athletic programs equally. Not only did they need to fund them equally, but they had to have equal participants. When the law was first enacted, there was a ton more men's sports than women's sports. So the true intent of the law was to increase women's sports. But what these colleges did is they cut men's sports to become in compliance with Title IX. So unfortunately, a whole slew of men's sports, men's baseball, men's swimming, men's wrestling, men's gymnastics, they ended up getting cut by the wayside. And it was really a dark time in college athletics. But fortunately, as the world has grown up and evolved, the inequities have been met, and most schools are getting really close to funding men's and women's sports equally. One of the problems that wrestling had is it was traditionally an all-male sport. So when we would say, hey, we want to bring back wrestling to a college that had cut wrestling, the administration would say, but we're only bringing on men, and that's going to bring us out of compliance with Title IX again. So over the last 10 years, there's been a groundswell of support for women's wrestling. And it initially met with a lot of resistance because people were, sort of chauvinistic. Girls shouldn't be wrestling. That's a rough and tumble sport, and that should be for boys, not girls. Well, it turns out there's been rapid growth in women's wrestling, and it's extremely popular. More and more girls are taking up the sport than ever before. And as we began to think about how could we grow the sport of wrestling in general, both men's and women's, we realized that we were excluding 50% of the population from wrestling when we said girls don't do this. So we had to rethink what we were doing. And as men, we realized, hey, we need women's wrestling. And so we've really kind of turned everything around, and we've said we're going to support this, we're going to get behind it. And now the big push is to get women's wrestling on a Division I level equal with men's Division I wrestling. So today, in support of women's wrestling, I'm wearing my Grow Women's Wrestling shirt, and everybody at the tournament that wants to grow wrestling is going to wear this shirt at the event. So we're going to see a whole bunch of shirts out there, and it's a great sport for women. It's fantastic. It teaches confidence, personal responsibility, self-defense, the ability to stand up for yourself. These are all great attributes, not just for men, but for women too. So we're thrilled to bring the women on, and it's great to see it grow, and I'm a huge supporter of this.
What do you think wrestling has taught you?
Unbelievable life lessons for me. First of all, in terms of personal accountability, I coach a youth wrestling team, and I tell those kids, when you cross that line, when you step from the side of the mat into the ring, it's only you. There's nobody else. It's not like a football game when you could point your finger at the guard that missed their block or the tackle that missed the block. It's all you there. And whether you win, lose, or draw, you have to put on your best performance. You have to do your very best. And whether you come out successful or not, when you come off that mat, I see a difference in my kids. I actually see them mature. I call it my fear laboratory, because you see a young kid that's like afraid. They say that kid over there is bigger and stronger than me. And I say, yeah, but you know more wrestling than they do. So go out and take them down and use your technique. And when you see a kid succeed in that way, you can just see it light up in their eyes. It's amazing, because they realize that they are responsible for their future in terms of wrestling. And then that translates into everything else that they do. So, when I'm coaching youth wrestling, I say, I'm not coaching wrestling. I'm doing brain surgery on little kids' brains every single day and practicing on the mat, because I'm putting in their mind concepts that they're going to carry them for the rest of their lives. And that is, the responsibility key. That is, the leadership part of this too, which has been incredible. I mean, when I was a kid, I had this amazing coach by the name of John Ceruto, and he was really one of the first leaders I was exposed to. And what he taught us by example were concepts of delegation. He had one guy in the team on the coaching staff who was our trainer. He had one guy who was the technician, and he was sort of the visionary. He was the mind guy who could get you ready for matches, and he would tell you stories about how last year, how this team made us look stupid on the mat, and how we want to come back and get them, and this is your job, and this is your opportunity to right a wrong that happened. And he always had the best inspirational speech. So at a young age, I saw that kind of leadership, and it really, again, the lessons of example are so much stronger than the lessons of any lectures you ever get. So it's taught me leadership. It's taught me responsibility. It's taught me willpower. I tell most of my wrestlers, there's no sport you're going to experience that demands that of you. The physical nature of it, the mental nature of it, the conditioning aspect of it, the fact that it's personal when you're out there. It's you against that other person. It's not like a tennis match. If you lose in tennis, 6-love, you go off to the side and you regroup. But after a wrestling match, if you get beaten 6-love, the scoring's not the same. But usually your neck is sore. You got a little mat burn on your forehead because the guy rubbed your face in the mat, and your pride is hurt, and you've got to kind of put that all back together. So for me, it's a laboratory to teach kids about life, and it's really fun. I love it.
So on the one hand, you coach wrestling, but you also participated. I mean, it comes from a little bit of experience in there. It sounds, that feeling of your facing the mat. It sounds like you're talking from experience when that's concerned. So how does that relate to neurosurgery? Because you're not known only for coaching. You're also known for putting your fingers into someone else's brains. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, typically the words wrestling and neurosurgery don't go together. But for me, it's in my DNA. I mean, it's literally spliced into everything that I do. And I think what it came down to is I was brought up in a family of medicine. My grandfather was a physician. My uncles were physicians. I used to go on my grandfather's house calls and carry his black bag when I was a kid. And so I really saw medicine at a young age and what it was like and what it meant to my grandfather and my uncles. So I knew I always wanted to be a physician. But I was a jock. I played football, I played lacrosse, and I wrestled in high school. And my brothers were athletes. My sister was an athlete. So we always played many sports. And I was probably more interested in sports than academics early on. But I always knew deep in my heart that I wanted to be a physician. So when I went to college, again, I met a great leader. I met my first college wrestling coach, a guy named Al Platt. And, he said, Mark, so you want to wrestle Division I and you would want to be a pre-med student? He goes, that's a tall task. The only way for you to do that is to really plan things out in a very, very methodical way. And he said, I'm gonna tell you a couple things right off the bat. He said, it's going to take you 5 years, not 4, to get through school. Because what we're going to do for you is your first year, you're not going to, and I tell this to college students now, if you're interested in pre-med, do not take sciences your first semester. You're getting to a new school, you're learning how to live away from your parents, you're meeting new friends, you have a new social network, you're trying to get your routines. You jump into a hard science grinder class in a university setting, and it's very unlikely you're going to get a good grade your first semester because you're just adjusting to everything. So what coach told me was, I want you to take some easy classes and get some A's and B's under your belt, get some confidence. And you don't take sciences until you're competing with other people who are just jumping into it as freshmen. So that was one important lesson that he gave me. And then the other was, you're going to take like something really hard in the summer when you're not wrestling, when you're not competing, and you can really focus on it. So he suggested taking physics in the summertime during summer school. And he was on me from the very beginning. Like your goal. Look, we're a Division I wrestling school. Like our goal is to win championships, get All Americans, win the Eastern title. But your number one goal is you're going to be a student. You're going to be a graduate of this school, and this is a tough liberal arts school. So you need a strategy. So getting that kind of advice was invaluable. And as I went along, I just followed his instructions. Take the science classes in your second year when you're competing against freshmen who don't have the benefit of the advice that you got, and you're going to be much better off. And so I managed to wrestle and to get good enough grades to actually get into medical school. And then when I got to medical school, I had no sport, so I had to turn my competitive energy into, how do I be the best doctor I can possibly be? How do I learn this stuff in a way where I'm going to be as knowledgeable as I can. And when I started getting exposed to the different specialties, I thought neurosurgery was exactly like wrestling. It was intense, it was grueling, it was intimate, and you made big impacts in few people's lives. So I always say to people who are interested in neurosurgery, um, you know, an internal medicine doctor is going to make a lot more impact on the world than you are, because an internal medicine doctor is going to take care of a million patients in their career. You're going to take care of maybe 25,000 patients your whole career, maybe 30, but you're going to make a huge impact in those people's lives. So it's big impacts in a few people's lives, and that's what I really liked.
Do you think that is also why you call neurosurgery a calling?
Absolutely. Um, I am always a doctor. Like I'm at this national wrestling tournament right now, and I'm getting a call while I'm watching a match, and it's like, hey, it's one of my buddies. Hey, I need to run a patient by you. Earlier yesterday, I had to call a patient who, wasn't having the normal expected recovery from his surgery, and I had to really kind of, calm him and reassure him. And it's funny. I've learned this over time because even though I love what I do, at a younger age, I would sometimes be frustrated when medicine would leak into my leisure time or my social time. But now I'm like, you know what? It's what you do. You do it all the time. And, I'm a believer in the concept of holography. And holography is the concept that, very similar to DNA, one small part of you will, if you look at it carefully and under a microscope, it's going to say everything about you. It's like the DNA code of your life. And so, if you see me at a wrestling tournament, you're going to see me picking up the phone, making a phone call to a patient, calling a friend, getting a phone call from a concerned relative that has a problem. And that's just the way I am. Or helping an injured kid on the mat, a kid who's hurt his neck. I'm over there checking him out, making sure he's okay. So, and I think when you accept that, um, your life is a lot easier. I see so many people say, "Oh, I want to compartmentalize." I don't think you can ever compartmentalize things. I think people bring home to work and they bring work to home, and the sooner you accept that and embrace it, the happier you're going to be.
I think if we just take a step back, when we look at neurosurgery, it is a team effort in a way. You have someone in the lead, and there's a lot of people around you that are specialized in their own fields. Somebody's in charge though, and somebody needs to lead, and at the same time, everybody needs to bring their whole selves and their own calling to this. When you're in an operating theater, how do you get that cohesion going? How do you get that absolute focus?
That's a great question. And I think that some of your previous podcasts have really hit the nail on the head. Hans Leroy talked about being curious, being authentic. I think those are really important parts about being a leader. And like as you said, as the neurosurgeon in an operating room, I am the captain of the ship. But I have a whole bunch of other people that need to do exactly like what they need to do and really, really well. And if I'm leading in the way that's most effective, I'm bringing the best out in them as well. And I think that's done with mutual respect. I know everybody's name in the operating room. I always make it a point to call people by their name. I think that it's just an interest level that gives people an immediate respect. I think being empathetic to what their needs are. So sometimes I'll be working and my suction is clogged and I need a new suction, and I've got a circulating nurse whose job is to do that. But they're also going to get a piece of equipment or some disposable that I need. And so you need to acknowledge, hey, listen, I know you're doing a lot right now, but we can't proceed without the suction. Why don't you prioritize the suction instead of saying suction now? That's not gonna be a good job. Sometimes we'll experience a period where the neuromonitoring people. So I have a team of people while I'm working. They have electrodes in the patient's arms and legs and on their brain, and they'll stimulate their brain and measure the impulses down to the legs and arms, and they'll stimulate the legs and arms and measure the impulses to the brain. And if there's a delay there, an abnormal delay, they need to reach out to me, Dr. McLaughlin. They're in the room, Dr. McLaughlin. I have a delay in the right arm. So, all right, that's an immediate okay, we got a warning sign now. What do I need to do? All right, is this because I've put the patient's arm in a position it's resting on something that's damaging their nerve and we need to move it? Or am I manipulating something in the surgical field that could be damaging that nerve as I'm working? Or could this person be having a stroke that is unrelated to the surgery but having another medical event? So I've got to reach out to different people now. So I need to go to the neuromonitoring person and say, okay, tell me more about it. What is exactly going on? When did it start? So they'll give me the timeline. Then I need to turn to the anesthesiologist. I've stopped operating. My hands are on the side here. Okay, is it possible that this person's anesthesia could be suboptimal? Do we need to give them a little bit more anesthesia? Are they waking up a little bit? We need to give them a deeper level of anesthesia. I need to sometimes speak to the neurologist who is actually on call monitoring the case and ask them, does this look like it's real or artifactual? Because there's a lot of false data that can be interpreted as something. And then, so really, the way to do that is collaborative. You need to basically get the most out of each person, and then I need to make a decision. Okay, here's what we're going to do moving forward. We're going to dose this person with some steroid, which may give them some neural protection. We're going to increase their blood pressure. So, anesthesia, will you please increase their blood pressure with a bolus of fluid, or give them a slug of IV fluid to kind of get their blood pressure up? And neurophysiology, the monitoring people, I want you to report back to me in 5 minutes, and let's move the arm a little bit. Let's put some padding under the elbow. Maybe the ulnar nerve is being compressed. So all those things need to be. There's a myriad of things that need to be dealt with, and you need to do that systematically and respectfully.
I think what I find interesting about what you're explaining is we see something similar in C-suite teams in organizations or top management teams, in that, yes, there is one person eventually will make a decision. I mean, the CEO tends to have that last say. But in teams that work really well, everybody else can speak up.
That's right. That's right.
And I see that in a lot of organizations. This past week, I was doing a training again, and people were afraid to speak up. And when they're afraid to speak up, in your case, the patient dies. And in their case, the organization lose sales, lose customers, and may eventually die as an organization. How do you think the training that you went through, or the experience that you went through, and for those around you, creates that environment that allows people to speak up?
Well, first, I think recognizing the environment, and we call that in our medical world the gradient of authority. So years ago, people were very reluctant to ask a question to the doctor. Doctor, this is a right-sided total knee replacement, and you're prepping the left knee. And these things would happen, and they would operate on the wrong side of the body. So these are things that that over time have been recognized in a systems fashion by hospitals, which I commend them for doing. We create something what's called a timeout before our surgeries, where we stop before we do anything. We identify in the patient's wristband, this is Mark McLaughlin operating on so and so, and this is the surgery, and this is the side, and I'm standing on the right side. That's something I did years ago before we even had timeouts, but I'm glad that it's been codified. And I think, and on top of it, I have always said to my staff, like, if at any point in any surgery you ever think I'm doing something that I shouldn't be doing, you must speak up right away. Please tell me. I'm not going to be upset with you. I'm going to commend you for it, because human beings are involved. Whenever human beings are involved, mistakes can happen. So having those conversations are very important. And then I think it's the rapport that you develop with your team too. You need to act. You need to walk the walk, because there are some doctors that will acknowledge that, but they really won't. They won't accept it, or they'll become defensive. And I think the old adage, and you've met Sheila Heen too. I love her adage, and I think it's her comment. Somebody may be criticizing you; they could be 100% wrong, but the attitude you need to take is, what is this person saying that actually might be true? Yes, I think it's wrong, but let me listen to them from a perspective of what could actually be true here. The other thing I think that's really important is, and we talk about getting the team together and on unified mission, is I really like them to know the patient, and sometimes they don't know the patient, so I make sure that they know, like, hey, this is a 46-year-old former Marine who can't go for a walk with his child, his 10-year-old boy, and he's coming in for surgery. That immediately galvanizes everybody. I tell a story in my book about a young girl named Carla, and Carla has a hemorrhage in her brain, and she is dying, like, before my eyes. And I have to get her to the operating room as quickly as possible. And in fact, I need to kind of bend some rules to get her up there, because in neurosurgery, even in an emergency setting, even in a top-notch hospital, it still takes time to get somebody registered and up to the operating room. It usually takes about 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes maybe 40 minutes. I needed to get her in the operating room in less than 30 minutes, and I needed a CAT scan. So I literally wheeled her to the CAT scanner and met a technician there who, didn't have any paperwork, didn't know if she had any allergies, got this doctor in his face who's like, we need a scan now. And, he's worried about his job. So I had to go to this guy and say to him really quickly, uh, John, this is Carla. She's dying right now. If we don't get her to the operating room, she's going to die. And I need a CAT scan to get to the operating room. I know you don't have the form. I know you don't know her allergies, but we have no time. And I need your help. Help me get her on this table now so we can try and save her. And just that 15 seconds of looking him in the eye and sharing the predicament that I was in got him on board. And we got the CAT scan, and he helped me wheel her up to the operating room. That's the kind of thing you need to do as a leader. You need to figure out, and I think again Hans talked about this. You need to figure out how somebody else ticks, and then work within that framework to get them to do what you want, but actually what's in their best interest. So I think that's one of the best definitions of leadership I've learned from one of my teachers, and that is bringing somebody along to a decision where they make a choice that's in their best interest. So whenever I'm telling somebody, listen, this is what I think, but I don't want you to do it unless you think it's in your best interest. So here's why I think it's in your best interest. I think, this is a young girl. I know you want to save her. I know you went into this for the right reasons. Let's save her. And we got to bend some rules here. That's the kind of approach I like to take it in my leadership.
I heard quite a lot of interesting things. So here's some of the stuff. I'm just making notes as we were going along. And I like the way you explain it. So let me try and just summarize it a little bit and tell me if I missed anything. You talk about permission, giving people permission to speak up, right? And then codifying what constitutes an emergency. What are the things where I want you to immediately stop me because this is going in the wrong direction? And again, that's for me part of that permission, allowing people to stop you and publicly so, because a lot of leaders would say, yeah, tell me in private, but that doesn't stop the problem right now. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about. And then the attitude of your reaction, which shows that you're allowing that permission or not. And then you talked about what is true from the perspective of the person signaling something. So from their perspective, they might think they're 100% correct, but you don't know their context, so you don't understand. So leaving that only as a hypothesis and first figuring out what the context is. And then the thing that you say, know the patient, to me, that means in my world is understand the context. Help people to understand the context of your decision making and what the goal is you would like to achieve, because then they can see how can they best support you. Sometimes they come up with surprises that may be better than what you thought it could be. And then, as I said, emergency overrides, and making the task or the problem relevant. So, for instance, you're talking about the guy that you need to get the CAT scan from. By explaining to him what the situation is, it becomes a relevant problem. It is not something purely academic or only a thought experiment. It is something that is real, that is recognizable, that's done to be done now. And don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that was something that came through all of that I think a lot of leaders may not do. You also mentioned, so is that sort of a summary of?
Absolutely, and it follows. Never be afraid to ask for help. We have a great rule in neurosurgery that I learned early on, and that is never worry about a patient alone. And really, that's a great allegory for life. Like, never worry about anything alone. Like, share it with somebody. You're going to hear a different perspective. They may tell you a different side of the story that you haven't thought of, and you're going to worry less. Similarly in medicine, like if I'm up at night thinking about somebody because I'm worried about them, I got to talk to one of my colleagues and say, hey, listen, let me run this by you. Let me make sure I'm covering all the bases. And if they say, yeah, I think you got everything covered, then I'm going to worry less. And so never worry about a patient alone. Never worry about anything alone. Talk to somebody about it, and and get it off your chest and see if they can give you another resource or another perspective. And then the other part of that, I think the word comes to mind: humility. As a leader, you have to have humility, and the best definition I've ever heard of humility is knowing when it's time to be the teacher and knowing when it's time to be the student. If you can discern those two times, you're humble.
I think it's It reminds me also of that sort of when the student about what is invisible. To the master, sometimes something might be invisible, and to the student as well. So it reminds me of something you said in I think it was in one of your talks or a book that you talked about never cut what you cannot see.
Yes, yes. That's a that's an expression that I learned from Dr. Peter Janetta, one of my mentors. I'll never forget hearing those 6 words the first time I heard them. Uh, I was a medical student visiting the University of Pittsburgh, and Dr. Janetta had built this mega center for facial pain. People from all over the world came to see him for trigeminal neuralgia, and he would run 4 operating rooms a day and sometimes do 16 operations in a day. And he perfected a procedure that cures a certain type of facial pain called trigeminal neuralgia or tic douloureux. And so he had perfected this school of neurosurgery there, and it was everybody wanted to go there. So I was a student applying to get into the program, and I was watching him. He was working under the microscope. I was scrubbed, but I was just looking through the eyepieces of the microscope, and he's working on somebody's brainstem under high magnification at the base of the brain, probably about 4 inches into someone's head at the most delicate center of the brain. And he's got these sharp micro scissors and this dissecting tool, and he's humming while he's going, humming like he's taking a walk in the park. And he's Mark, you know what? Never cut what you can't see in neurosurgery. Never cut what you can't see. And what an incredible lesson! Like when you have sharp micro scissors around somebody's brainstem, when you're closing those scissors, you better know exactly what's between those blades. And again, like magnify that up out in life. It's the same thing. When you make a decision, and I love this, that the actual Latin root for decision is cut, to cut. So a decision is a cutting. Don't make that decision unless you have all the information you possibly can get within the desired time frame, obviously, because sometimes we have to make decisions with limited information, and that's when I start talking about cognitive dominance, which we can talk about. But really, Dr. Janetta's rules, never cut what you can't see, never worry about a patient alone. Those are things I take with me and I apply to everything in life, not just neurosurgery.
I think it's a very interesting concept as well from a leadership perspective, especially with the pandemic. And I think now with the war, it's going to be similar. There will be organizations that will go through huge rationalizations and cutting of personnel. I think we'll see more of that in Europe than probably in the US, because the US, there seems to be more of a growth at the moment. But it also means that when we cut, the general tendency has been to cut based on skills and on cost only. And we tend to forget that there's a human element and a human cost involved. And that when people work together and work well together, that well-oiled machine is built on relationships, not on skill or on the salary that you get. And I'm now helping an organization as well to basically figure out what do they need to see to be able to cut. And it's been quite enlightening to see that there's more to this world than just the numbers. There's something else that you mentioned, and I think about. I'm just wondering if we should have given someone, another president of a country, this expression before he started to invade. But you talk about adding a pressure valve on a cranial pressure.
Say again, adding a pressure valve.
Adding a pressure valve when you have cranial or on cranial pressure.
Right. Okay. So that goes to the old neurosurgical rule: always leave a drain. You need to leave a pop-off valve in somebody's head when you start operating on them. So particularly when we have patients that have brain tumors, they have swelling, and that swelling increases the pressure inside the head. If you think of it, the skull is like a fixed vault, and inside that vault there are 3 things: there's brain tissue, there's blood, and there's cerebrospinal fluid. So when something starts growing in there, starts taking up more space, the pressure goes up, and if you know your physics well, it goes up pretty rapidly. As it starts slowly, and then it moves up pretty rapidly in an exponential way. So when we do surgery, the intracranial pressure is higher than atmospheric pressure. So if you make a hole in the skull, the brain is going to sort of come out. Even naturally, normally, even with normal intracranial pressure, it's higher than atmospheric pressure. But if you have somebody with a tumor and there's a lot of swelling, that brain can literally come out at you very quickly, and it can strangulate through the hole that you've made. So normally we want to make the smallest hole possible to get in to take the tumor out, but we make that hole, and if there's a lot of swelling, the brain it can literally squirt out almost like toothpaste in a dangerous situation. So what we do is we put in a valve away from the tumor in another area. We make a small hole and we pass a small catheter and we drain the spinal fluid. So again, we're taking one of those three components out of the brain so that the pressure is lower, so that when we open the head, the brain is relaxed and it's under a more controlled situation. So another mantra that we have when we're doing those kinds of things is always leave a drain. And, again, I think these adages didn't come from neurosurgery. They came from life, and then somebody brought them into neurosurgery, and now I'm taking them from neurosurgery and bring them back into life, is you got to always have a safety valve in what you do. When I'm giving a talk, you got to have a back out. Let's say you planned a 40-minute talk, and then you get to the conference, and the person in front of you talked 20 minutes over, then you only have a 20-minute talk. So you got to figure out how can you have an escape hatch, right? When I do this in parenting a lot of times, I'll think about a conversation. Maybe I want to have a heart to heart with one of my kids about something that they're doing that I don't think is in their best interest. I'll always think about, like, okay, what happens if the conversation starts going south, and I start getting a lot of resistance, or I'm not at my best in explaining what I mean. Figure out a way to, like, say, let's talk about this later, or can I have a do-over later? I want to talk about this again. So get some sort of an escape hatch to deal with it. Sometimes that happens in surgery too. I'll get into a surgery and we'll have a plan, and that plan will not be going according to what I had expected, and we see some anatomy that's unusual, and I have to make a decision. All right, do I continue on or do we close up before we've gotten to the definitive layer and cut our losses and go back and get a new imaging study, go out and talk to the family and have another conversation with the patient. So I had another expression one of my chief residents had is, it's never too late to do the right thing. And I took that really to heart. And that is, when you're moving along and something's going and, something doesn't feel right, or you need to say something and you feel awkward in saying it to somebody in a conversation, it's never too late to do the right thing. It's never too late to say the right thing. And even if you don't think it's the right time, it is the right time. If it's up on your mind and it's troubling you, it's the right time to bring it up. So that's a good rule of thumb. Something I'm still working on. I can't say I've mastered it, but I do think it's important.
I think it's sometimes we also have to just be careful on that one, because sometimes we want to say something, but the other person might not be ready to hear.
Yes.
And so do you also have conflicts in a theater room? Because I can just imagine that's not a place you want to have a fight.
There's no place for anger in the operating room. And another expression, I'm giving you all my rules today, is you don't want to be doing a lot of thinking in the operating room. You should do all your thinking before the surgery and in the planning, and that includes planning your escape hatches, planning a little bit like a battle. You need to have a plan, and you need to have an exfil. How do you get out? And so when is there conflict? Oftentimes there can be conflict. It's more of an internal, like, what should I do conflict. For instance, I'll be doing an operation, and the neuro monitoring person will tell me they've lost the signals. In other words, they basically, on the monitor, the person's gone paralyzed. Okay, so very tense situation. Is it something that I've done because I'm working within a millimeter of the spinal cord? Is it an artifactual or a technical thing? Is it a blood pressure thing related to anesthesia? I've got to figure out what to do. I've got to consult with all my people. And sometimes, again, never worry about a patient alone. I'll pick up the phone and call my colleague and say, all right, I'm halfway through the decompression of the spinal cord. The patient's lost their signals. It could be from what I'm doing. Do I proceed or do I back out? You know, and in that situation, it's almost always, look, you have to proceed, because the best, if this happened before the operating room, what would you do? You take them to the operating room and you take that disc out. So you need to go ahead and complete the job, and, you know, and just get them to the recovery room as quickly as possible and wake them up to see if this is a mechanical problem or it's actually a biological problem. So yeah, again, focusing on the alternatives is important, but having that plan going in is really the most important.
So, if you wrote this book, Cognitive Dominance, how did you come about with the title, and what
It's
is
a
it
very
about?
Darth Vader-ish term, isn't it? Cognitive dominance, you know, and we debated whether that would be the best title for it. It's it's to me, it's a military concept that I learned up at West Point when I was giving some talks to the sports psychology classes, and they turned me on to it. They basically told me, well, what you're describing in your stories is something called cognitive dominance. So I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, that's enhanced situational awareness that facilitates rapid and accurate decision making under stressful conditions with limited decision making time. So that's a military concept that when I heard it, I thought, man, that's more than just military. That's neurosurgery. Um, but in a larger sense, it's parenting, it's running a business, it's everything. I mean, it's really what do we want to do? So when I heard the term, I thought, man, how do I get more of that? You know, I want that, and and tell me as much as you can about it. So I began studying it and reading it, and there are some definitions out there that talk about sort of mind control and how a captor can control his captive's mind. But really, the concept that I mean is basically bringing your best in any situation and being yourself. So the whole the whole concept came from these stories. I got invited up to West Point to speak to the sports psychology class about surgery and what promotes effective surgery, what promotes effective performance in surgery, and what gets in the way. So it was a really great experience. And when I first started doing it, I just started telling stories. They said, "Look, you don't have to. I've never been in the military. Just tell your story about surgery and how you performed it and what got in the way." And so I would tell stories. I told the story about that young girl Carla and how I had to get her to the operating room quickly. And it was kind of like, that the old music box where you want to play the music a little faster, but you can't. You don't want to break the knob. And that was kind of what I was trying to do with a hospital situation. And then I tell a story about a malpractice situation where I've got this trained trial attorney who's trying to lead me down a path that I don't want to go down because he's trying to undermine my thought process in this patient's unfortunate situation that he's trying to blame on me. And then it was really, what are the learning experiences that I've had in the operating room? So what happened was I started telling these stories, and when I started thinking about cognitive dominance, I thought, wow, if I can somehow stitch these stories together, I really think it gives a good example of a surgeon's view of what it is. And I was so fortunate to interface with my co-writer, Sean Coyne, who was an experienced editor who had written a number of books. And Sean, again, gave me a different perspective, even of myself, that made the book a lot better. So, just as a point of reference, the book centers around one major experience I had as a young neurosurgeon, where I took care of this young boy, Anthony. And I gave Anthony my best operation, and Anthony just had disastrous complications. And I blamed myself for those complications for years. And I couldn't. Anthony never left me in a way that was corrosive, It was harmful to me, and it affected not only my, my personal outlook on my career, but also my life, and how through writing this book and telling the story of Anthony and my experience, and actually ultimately finding out that in the long run, Anthony's surgery was a success, and I was able to restore Anthony to his family, not in the way that I had envisioned, but in a way that his family could live with and his family could thrive with. And I realized that, oh my God, I had this whole story totally wrong. And telling that story and also hearing it from another person's perspective made me realize that I was a good surgeon and I did a great job. And unfortunately, in neurosurgery, it's risky business, and not everybody does great, and not everybody comes out of the end the same person as before. And so, cognitive dominance was really my own cognitive behavioral therapy lesson, and I probably learned more out of the book than anybody. But sharing it was really, really important.
I think we know each other from the writings workshops and stuff, and so yeah, I agree. Writing is quite an eye opener. The reflection that you need to do, it's there's a huge amount of reflection. It's not just research and then putting it down in a book, and it's bringing it all together. Also gives you a different perspective on yourself. And does a lot of self-evaluation. So I totally recognize that. You also talk about, it sounds like you went from a more subjective view to a more objective view through the story of Anthony as well. I was wondering, you talk about a concept of mapping. How does that help you to go from the subjective
Sure.
to the objective?
So, with cognitive dominance, the other related terms are cognitive dissonance and cognitive consonance. And so, cognitive dissonance is where we're doing something or acting in a way that is contrary to one of our deepest values in some way, shape, or form. I think it first came up in The Great Gatsby, the cognitive consonance and cognitive dissonance, the life of Gatsby, and so cognitive dissonance is living or acting in a way that's inconsistent with our goals. Cognitive consonance is actually pursuing and living our best self and feeling that and being in alignment with our deepest and most deeply held values. So what we did in the book is we created a system of dealing with fear. So, the underlying concept was, as a neurosurgeon, I have to make a lot of life and death decisions. And those decisions create anxiety. Anxiety, am I going to make the right decision? Am I going to choose to operate on the person that needs to get operated on? Am I going to choose to not operate on the person who, shouldn't be operated on? These weigh heavily on a surgeon. And if I calculated my career, in the book, I think I say I've made 30,000 life and death decisions, which is what any neurosurgeon does in their career. Maybe some more and some less. But in making those decisions, what have I learned from them? Like how have I gotten better with this? And so we sort of talk about fear. We're all going along in our life, and he sort of took a page from Jordan Peterson's concept that we're all going along in our life, and we act in a certain way, and we intend to reach a goal. And along the way, we get events that occur in our life that are an obstacle, or some way throw us off, or they may propel us towards our goal, and they may not. And so these are events, and they induce fear because they're the unknown in some way, shape, or form. Some people may not say they're fear. They may say anxiety, uneasiness, unsettlement, anxious. All those things are low-level fear. And so we have an unexpected event that enters in our life, and that causes us to have some fear. Now, what do we do with that fear? Well, some people, suppress it. They don't tackle it, and that's what most of us do. We don't like to experience it. We push it down. But if you can deal with it, you're going to be more effective, and that's the whole concept. Because if you can reduce the level of fear that you have, you're going to be more effective. So the way we tackled it is we said, when an event comes that's unexpected, break it into its components. So what is it subjectively related to you, and what is it objectively related to you? So in an objective sense, is it materially good or bad for you? And subjectively, is it consistent with your life goals and your life values, or is it inconsistent with your life values? So, perfect example. You get a job promotion, okay? Objectively, that is great. Materially, you're going to get a better office, you're going to get a better pay, you may get more benefits, your pension's going to be better. So materially, objectively, that's good. But let's say that job promotes you to a level where you have to work with a toxic boss. That's subjectively going to be a negative experience for you. So if you can map these things out in positives and negatives, you can literally look at a Cartesian graph and you can know where you are. And we define 4 quadrants. So the 4 quadrants are the double positive. That's when something's objectively and subjectively good for you. That's when you're in flow. That's when everything's clicking. And really the point of that one is don't think. Just live it. Be it. It's wonderful. But you can't always live in flow. In fact, life would be very boring if we all just lived in flow. We have to experience other things that happen. So sometimes we experience these job promotions and with a toxic boss. That puts us in a positive objective, but a negative subjective life. All right. So that's what I call the calm before the storm. That's where that's not going to last for long. You're going to have to figure out what to do in that situation. All right. Well, sometimes we get hit with a double negative. We get a cancer scare. All right. We have a diagnosis of cancer. That's objectively terrible. And that's subjectively terrible because that's inconsistent with what we want to do in our life is continue to live and have purpose, right? So that's what I call the all is lost quadrant. And that's like the deepest, darkest segment of our life that we all experience at times as well. Excuse me. And then sometimes something subjectively is positive, but objectively is negative. So we lose a job, all right? We lose our job. That's materially, objectively negative, but it gives us time to, write a book or reevaluate our life relationships with our friends and our family, and maybe makes us pursue an avenue that we would have loved to have done years ago, and now we can do. J.K. Rowling, perfect example. Loses her job. She's unemployed. She's got kids. What does she do? Starts writing on a napkin in the bookstore about her book, and boom, Harry Potter's born, right? So those are the events that are birthing a new skill set, I call that. So that's the upper left-hand, negative, objective, positive, subjective. That's where we basically say that was a sad event, that was an unhappy event, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me. So what we talk about in cognitive dominance is if you can map that out. And there are some other subtleties about known and unknown and obstacle or tool. But bottom line is, if you can map that out, you know where you are, you know where you need to go. And really, in our life, it's really it's a movement from these different quadrants. It's a heroic journey from going from one to another. And it's not always calm before the storm, all is lost, birthing new skill set. Sometimes it's all is lost to flow. You never know. It can be, but it's a heroic journey that we're all on. And it makes us more effective in what we do, and it reduces our fear because, in my world, the opposite of love is fear. And if I can reduce the amount of fear I have, I can love more. And when I love more, I'm more effective. And that's just not loving my wife. That's loving what I do. That's loving my family. That's loving people around me, loving my patients. And when I can love them more, I'm more effective at what I do.
So you're talking about on the one hand, applying a model, or let's say a framework to our perspectives. But what if we took leadership as a perspective? You have these platform elements that you talk about for leadership. What would those be?
That's a great question. So I think even in the leadership realm, we all go through these different periods in our career where we hit flow and we're at our best, and then sometimes we're not as good as we want to be, and then sometimes we make a terrible mistake, and then other times we're learning. So I think that applying that model is a really interesting way to approach leadership, and leaders good leaders are constantly learning, so they're open to criticism, and they're not afraid of making mistakes. You have to make mistakes if you're going to be a leader. You can't be afraid of that, because if you're trying to protect something, you're going to be indecisive, or you're going to ultimately choose the wrong, make the wrong choice. As it relates to the platforms, I think what I talk to my young wrestlers at, and it's funny because everything that I do, again, in the concept of holography, is when I give a wrestling talk, it's also a talk to my employees. It's a talk to myself. I'm trying to learn more about myself. And so when I talk to my young wrestlers, they all want to climb on that podium and be the top podium. They want to get a gold medal and look out, and I say, that's great, but people think that you climb to that podium. You don't climb to it. You build it layer by layer by layer by layer. And so layers of a podium in a wrestler are doing your push-ups and getting stronger, are drilling, are putting the right food in your mouth, or having the right environment of excellence around you. All of those things are being coachable. So being a sponge and learning from as many people as you can. And so I tell my wrestlers, each one of those is a layer to make your platform higher and higher and higher. And then from a leadership standpoint, what I say is every book I read is another layer on my platform. It's a place to put me higher and higher and higher. And the higher you get, the farther you can see, and the more you can help other people up. That's the goal of getting up to that podium, is helping others get up to their podium. It's not so that everybody can see you. That would be the egomaniac's reason to get on the top of a podium. But really, as a true leader, you want to get on the top of the podium to help others up and to see more and to see farther, so that you can help others see what you see. So the concept of the platforms is really understanding that you can always be working on something as a leader, whether it's your coachability, whether it's your knowledge base, whether it's your listening skills. All those things are critically important. And the greatest leaders I've ever been associated with were curious, and they were students.
I think it's interesting to say. It's like, I think it's also a good place for us to maybe pause and think. Those are great things that leaders should learn, and that every leader should learn in this world. And I think what you're also saying about that we need to reflect and grow constantly if you want to be a good leader. I think that's a very, very good tip. So I'd like to thank you today for coming to us and helping us out and understanding a little bit about neurosurgery and the impact that has on wrestling and has had on your life and what we can learn from it.
It's my
Thank you
pleasure
so
to be
much for
here.
joining us
Thanks
today,
for
Mark.
the opportunity. I love talking with you. I think this is love your podcast. Learned a lot from the two that I've listened to, and intend to make it part of my library. Yeah, happy to share this. I'd love to hear reactions. And as you know, I have a website, markmclaughlinmd.com. If you're interested in learning more, that's a place where a lot of my writing is and my blog is. And I have a YouTube channel as well, Mark McLaughlin MD, which focuses on some of the talks that I give. And it's just a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolute pleasure, Mark. We'll add all those details on the website dedicated to you for the podcast, and everybody will be able to click on those links and find them there. Thank you again for joining us today. When I reflect on what I just talked to Mark about, there's one of the things that he said in one of his talks that actually came to mind. Casual and casualty. If we treat leadership casually, we don't use it as a learning process to become a little bit better every single day, then our people are the casualties. And in a world dominated by violence at the moment and by war, why should we still accept leadership that causes casualties? Can we take ownership? Can we take that little bit of care with people's lives to make sure that we can actually make a difference, make it better, and leave no casualties behind? Let's all not treat our people casually, our leadership casually, and let's learn, grow, and become the best leaders that we can be. Well, I've been Xinderval, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Now go out there, be exponential, and do something nice for someone else. You can find us on the web by going to podcast.exponentially.me. We will also find additional media resources and some amazing insights.